Get out of my house or I'm putting you in handcuffs. That's what came out of my mouth in my own kitchen, in full uniform, while the president of our HOA stood there, frozen with my tax papers in one hand and a little pry bar in the other. Red and blue lights from 3 patrol cars were bouncing around the room. Neighbors were on the sidewalk filming, and this woman who'd spent years acting like she owned our neighborhood finally realized she was the one going in the back of a cruiser. If you're wondering how a lady with a clipboard ended up in cuffs in my kitchen, it started the morning she let herself into my house at 6 a.m. and smiled like she had every right to be there. My name is Fletcher Brennan. I've been a deputy sheriff for 9 years. I bought a house in Meadowbrook Estates because on paper it was everything I wanted for my son and me. Quiet streets matching mailboxes, kids' bikes on the sidewalks, the kind of place that looks like a commercial for normal life. 2 years earlier, my wife Emma had died in a car accident, and it was just me and my boy Owen trying to figure out how to breathe again. When the realtor slid the HOA packet across the closing table and called it strict but fair, I nodded, signed where she pointed, and told myself I'd actually read the bylaws later. You know how that goes. The first time I saw Diane Rothel was at an HOA meeting in the little community room by the pool. Gray carpet, bad coffee metal folding chairs. At the front of the room stood this woman with perfect hair, a crisp blazer, and a laminated badge that said HOA President, like it was a rank. For almost an hour, she talked about trash can placement, acceptable lawn ornaments, the exact date and time holiday decorations had to come down. One guy in the back tried to ask if he could build a taller fence for his dog, and she shut him down so fast he didn't say another word. People laughed when she made little jokes, but nobody really looked her in the eye. I walked home thinking, yeah, she likes control. But if my biggest issue here is where I park my trash cans, I can live with that. A few weeks later, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. You know your own house. The way the heater clicks, the fridge hums, the stairs creak. This was different. Footsteps. I checked my phone. 6:02 a.m. Owen was asleep upstairs. I grabbed my flashlight out of reflex and headed toward the living room. Light was spilling under the door. For a second, I thought, great, we got a burglar. I stepped in ready to start giving commands, and instead of a stranger in a mask, I saw Diane standing in my living room with a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, calmly taking pictures. The back door lock was hanging crooked. Muddy footprints ran from the kitchen to where she stood. Get out of my house or I'm calling the police, I snapped. And halfway through the sentence, it hit me that I am the police, and somehow I was the one who felt like he didn't belong. She didn't flinch, didn't even look annoyed. She straightened her lanyard, gave me this patient little smile and said, Section 14.3 of the Meadowbrook Estates Bylaws grants the board president authority to conduct property inspections. She held up a laminated card like it was a badge. While she talked, she kept snapping photos. My trash cans through the back window, the stack of mail on my counter, with my name and address, visible the coffee maker I'd left plugged in the tiny succulent on the windowsill Emma had bought right before she died. The one Owen called Mom's plant. Your receptacle is the wrong color. Your lighting exceeds wattage limits, and this plant violates the aesthetic uniformity clause. She said like she was announcing the weather. I felt rage hit so fast, I actually had to focus on my breathing. But 9 years in uniform teaches you not to yell when you want to. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and told her flatly, I'm documenting this. You entered my home without my permission. That's criminal trespass. She didn't look worried. She smiled a little and said, I have a key. then pulled out a brass house key identical to mine on a pink HOA keychain. The previous owner provided emergency access. It was never returned. I replayed the closing in my head, the signatures, the walk through the realtor's fast talk. No one had said, by the way, the HOA can walk into your kitchen whenever it feels like inspecting. Diane scribbled on her clipboard and headed for the door. You'll receive formal notice within 72 hours. Fine structure begins at $500 per day, per violation. I count 7, she said. It would be a shame if legal complications forced you to sell. Children don't always handle instability well. Then she walked out, leaving muddy footprints and a busted lock behind her. It was 6:47 a.m. Owen's alarm would go off at 7. I fixed the lock as best I could, wiped the floor, checked every room like I was clearing a scene, then forced myself into dad mode. By the time he came downstairs, in dinosaur pajamas, asking for cereal, I was standing at the stove, pretending nothing in the world was wrong. I thought about calling dispatch, but I could already imagine the story getting told in the squad room. Deputy calls an HOA president for taking pictures of his coffee maker. You know what I mean. So I did what I know how to do. I documented. I installed a Ring camera. I wrote down everything she'd said. I took photos of my own trash cans, my porch light, the plant. Then I opened the HOA packet for real and realized the summary I'd been given was 10 pages out of 90. The notice showed up that afternoon, just like she promised. 7 violations each with a daily fine amount that added up faster than my paycheck. Attached were the photos she'd taken in my kitchen on HOA letterhead. It felt like looking at crime scene pictures of my own life. I filed an appeal, attached my photos, quoted their own bylaws. An hour later, I got a 1-line email. Your appeal has been reviewed and denied. No explanation. No board vote. Just her name. Then came another notice. Grass height exceeding standards. I'd mowed 3 days earlier with their own chart in my hand. I went outside with a tape measure, filmed myself measuring random spots. Tallest blade under their limit. Appealed. Denied. Next came paint color, non-compliant. I pulled the closing documents, found the approved code. Got a color match at the hardware store, sent side-by-side photos. Appealed. Denied. It was never about the rules. It was about me. While the paper war stacked up on my kitchen counter, the neighborhood around us started to shrink. People who'd waved when we first moved in stopped making eye contact. Conversations at the park died out when I walked up with Owen. At the next HOA meeting, Diane put photos of my house up on the projector, my yard, my cans, my mailbox, and talked about a homeowner who refuses to comply and how one person's neglect could hurt everyone's property values and invite problems. She didn't use my name, but everyone knew. When I raised my hand and calmly laid out my photos, measurements, and timelines, she gave me 2 minutes, cut me off, and called me disruptive. After the meeting, a neighbor named Grant pulled me aside and said he'd once voted against one of her enforcement proposals when he was on the board and suddenly got hit with 12 violations in a month. She breaks you or she pushes you out, he said. Most people just move. I might have kept grinding quietly if it had stayed about my pride, but it started landing on Owen. One day, he came home, tossed his backpack down, and went straight to his room. When I finally got him to talk, he said Tyler's mom told him we're bad neighbors. He can't come to my birthday. At the community pool, he tried to join a game of Marco Polo, and I watched 2 moms pull their kids out of the water the second he swam over. They didn't even pretend it was about sunscreen or snacks. After a few minutes of him paddling around alone, he walked over and said, can we go home?" That night I heard him crying into his pillow, asking if we were in trouble with everybody. Then came the phone call from school. He'd fainted on the playground. They were sending him to the ER out of caution. After the tests, the doctor told me he was physically okay, but showing signs of serious anxiety. "Kids don't have the tools adults do," she said. "If they live in constant tension, it comes out somewhere." She asked if there'd been a lot of stress at home or in the neighborhood. All I could do was nod. That night, when the house was finally quiet and Owen was asleep on the couch, my phone rang from a blocked number. I let it go once, then picked up and hit record, because by then I'd learned. It was Diane. She started with fake sympathy, said she'd heard about Owen's episode, that she hoped he was all right. Then her tone shifted. She said, "You know, agencies like Child Protective Services take stability very seriously. A single father who constantly fights with his community, who can't follow basic standards, who creates conflict. Some might question whether that's a healthy environment for a fragile child." I asked if she was threatening my custody because I appealed her fines. She said, "I'm just observing that a move to a more suitable neighborhood could resolve a lot of concerns. No one wants things to escalate." Then she hung up. I sat in the dark, listening to that recording on repeat. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just pettiness. This was someone willing to use my kid as leverage. The next morning, I called a civil rights attorney and dumped everything on her desk. The 6 a.m. break-in, the bogus violations, the denied appeals, the meeting where she tried to make me the neighborhood villain, the pool, the ER, the CPS threat. She listened, then said, "You've got pattern malice and damage. If we can add clear crimes, trespass threats, maybe mail tampering, stalking, this stops being neighbor drama and starts being a case a prosecutor can't ignore." A few days later, I walked out to my mailbox and found the door bent and hanging envelopes scattered across the lawn. Some had already been opened. IRS, my bank, a letter from Owen's school. The Ring camera showed Diane at 3:17 a.m., hoodie up, gloves on, using a screwdriver to pop the lock and flipping through my mail under the streetlight. Mail tampering is a federal felony. The postal inspector who came out didn't laugh or shrug. She collected the opened envelopes, pulled the footage, and opened a federal case number. Around that time, my elderly neighbor Rosemary showed up at my door with a small key in her hand and tears in her eyes. She'd lived in Meadowbrook for 18 years. 12 years earlier, she and her late husband had gone toe-to-toe with Diane over a backyard shed and wound up buried in violations and fines. He had a heart attack in the middle of all that, she said. I can't say she caused it, but I know what that stress did to him. In her basement, behind a framed piece of embroidery, she had a wall safe. Inside were 12 years of records, violation notices, emails, photos of Diane standing in people's yards at night, copies of complaints, even a restraining order that had mysteriously disappeared from the county system. 7 families, all with the same story, stand up to her, get crushed, sell, and leave. I spent hours photographing every page, every email header, every date. I took everything. My videos, the recorded calls, Rosemary's files, the mail tampering evidence, the ER paperwork, to my sheriff and the district attorney. I didn't go in as the deputy with an HOA problem. I went in as a victim with a 12-year pattern of abuse in his hands. They watched Diane pry open my mailbox on video, listened to the CPS threat flipped through Rosemary's folders and the postal inspector's report, and the energy in the room shifted. We got a warrant for interior cameras. I announced on social media that I was taking family leave and taking Owen out of town to focus on his health. public posts, suitcases loaded into my car, where the whole block could see. In reality, I dropped Owen at a friend's place across town and came back in an unmarked car with my partner. That night, we tucked tiny cameras into smoke detectors and vents and put a small sign by the back door saying the property was under video surveillance. 2 days later, she took the bait. She parked a couple houses down, watched my driveway for a while, then walked around back with that same brass key. The cameras caught her unlocking my door, stepping into what she thought was an empty house, moving from room to room, opening drawers, taking pictures. When she reached my office and saw the locked filing cabinet, she pulled a small pry bar from her bag and forced it open. She laid out my tax returns, bank statements, and custody documents, snapping photos like she was building her own little case. Once we had that from multiple angles, we rolled up in marked units. This time, when I walked through my own front door in uniform, with backup behind me, she looked like the one who didn't belong. I told her she was under arrest for burglary, criminal trespass, stalking, criminal threats, and mail tampering. She tried to say Bylaw 14. 3 tried to talk about inspection rights, and I just held up my phone and showed her the live footage of herself prying open my locked cabinet with a metal tool. There isn't a homeowners association on earth that covers that. We walked her out in handcuffs past the same neighbors who'd watched her run this place like her private kingdom for years. Rosemary stepped forward with her folder and told the detective she was ready to testify. Grant came up and said he wanted to file his own complaint. The postal inspector had a federal case ready. The DA had 12 years of victims. Diane eventually pled guilty rather than risk a trial. Burglary, stalking, criminal threats, mail tampering. She did real time, ended up on strict probation, got permanently banned from HOA leadership, had a restraining order, keeping her away from me. Owen and the other families, and had to pay restitution that went into therapy, mortgage, help, and a little breathing room for people she'd been squeezing for a long time. Meadowbrook isn't perfect now, but it's different. The bylaws got rewritten. A professional management company handles enforcement. Appeals go to a neutral third party instead of one woman with a clipboard. Neighbors talk again. Kids play together at the pool. Owen sleeps better. We put a new bird feeder in the backyard, and when he sees a bright red cardinal, he still says, "Dad, I think that's Mom." And I let him have that. Sometimes justice isn't fireworks. It's just being able to walk to your mailbox without your chest tightening. So let me throw this to you. If you were in my shoes, when would you have pushed back? The first time you found muddy footprints from the HOA president in your kitchen, when your kid got iced out at the pool after the hospital? Or would you have just packed up and moved to get away from it? Do you think what she got was enough for 12 years of using rules to terrorize families? Or did she get off light? Have you ever had an HOA, a boss, a board? Anybody like that use a little bit of power to make your life miserable? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, whether you think the system actually worked here, and if you want more real stories like this, hit subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Because the only way this kind of thing slows down is when people stop staying quiet about it.